Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the support tier list for 11-17. So, as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the live stream on Twitch now every night, starting around 11:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually going until about 2:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very friendly, chill community. I'm happy to hang out with you there. And we are no longer streaming on YouTube. It's just on Twitch, but we're still going to keep releasing videos on YouTube, like this tier list, and I'm going to be putting up some more guides and other content as well. So be sure to come by and check all that out. And I am trying to play a greater diversity of champions as well in the support role, just kind of for fun and just to, you know, get some more experience on other champs as well. So it's not just Rakan all the time. We still do play some Rakan. But we've been playing some more Braum lately, Alistar, Lulu, Leona, even some Zyra, all kinds of other champions. So come by and check that out. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. And do check out the patch notes as well. I released that a couple of days ago, and I'm probably going to do an ADC tier list, maybe later today, maybe tomorrow, but I'll have some more tier lists for you coming out soon. Okay. I still think that Rakan's going to be very strong right now. Not a lot has changed. Zyra did get buffed on this patch, and that's really important because I don't know if statistically in every ELO bracket if she's going to be a much higher win rate or not. I didn't look at the ADCs, but I think she'll certainly be better than she was, and she will be more popular than she was. So her win rate's still like not great, but her play rate's moving up just a little bit. And whenever Zyra's good, then I think Rakan's going to be good. I think she's going to be great in pro. She's just a little bit hard for people to play in solo queue. But Rakan's still good even if Zyra's not good. That just makes him a little bit better if Zyra's there. So what is it about Rakan? Why do I think that he's so strong when he very rarely has more... when he very rarely has higher than like a 50% win rate? Well, a lot of it just comes down to his versatility, right? He's blind pickable. There are very few matchups where you can't find a way to win the game, right? So he can play, you know, aggressive for all-ins if he wants to, if you can land your W's consistently. He has decent all-ins with his shields. Then he also roams really well. My southern accent came out there, really well. Roams really well if you want to do that. If your lane's just really far behind, you've got an auto-filled ADC or whatever, you can maybe just roam to middle or look for plays in the jungle. And then he actually scales fairly well also because he has good scaling on his E with the shield. So that does give him access to getting items like Ardent Sensor if you want that, or Staff of Flowing Water, or you can get more traditional kind of hybrid tank items like Zeke's. And he's very good at using the Chemtech Putrefier as well, which is what I recommend in a lot of matchups, just second item. He's fantastic with that because it gives him really good stats in general. Just he loves the ability haste, and he has great scaling with the ability power, and that 60% Grievous off of your shields is really good. And then also healing. So if you take Font of Life, whenever you hit somebody with your R or your W, it's going to put that font debuff over them for 6 seconds, and anyone on your team that auto-attacks them receives a heal from you. Since that counts as a heal from you, that triggers the Chemtech Putrefier. So they can keep refreshing this and get that 60% Grievous wounds for a really long time, up to like 9 seconds, and anyone can get it. Right, so it just spreads it very evenly around your entire team in a team fight, and it's just pretty much going to keep that up constantly, right? Versus something like Thorn Mail, which is what tanks will usually get as kind of their Grievous Wound option. You have to CC individual targets in order to trigger that. So if the enemy team has multiple people that are getting Gore Drinkers or Divine Sunders or Conquer, and that's super common to have 2 or 3 people on the enemy team that will have all that stuff, it's harder to spread it around with Thornmail than it is with Putrefier. Putrefier is also much more cost efficient and much cheaper of an item. So he's one of the best Putrefier users out there, I think, just because of how easily he can apply that Font of Life on those targets and spread it around. So he does have really long cooldowns early on, and his W does take some getting used to. It's a very small hitbox compared to something like an Alistar combo. And that 18-second cooldown on both the W and the E means that you have some pretty extreme windows of vulnerability in the early game. If you use those cooldowns and you don't get a lot out of them, the enemy can punish you. So that is kind of the downside. His early game is a little on the weak side if you don't hit everything. But he is also one of the only engaged champs who can comfortably go in. So you can go in with your W, and then if the situation starts going south, a jungler comes out of a bush or your team just doesn't follow up or whatever, then he can get back out with your E as well. So that gives you a little more versatility with your positioning in fights, a little bit more safety. Speaking of safety, he's extremely good. If people are going to try to dive you, you can usually get out with your W. You can also place deeper wards than a lot of tanks and safely get out with your W if the situation gets kind of crazy. So he does have a much higher level of safety, I think, than a lot of tanks in terms of evasion. Another thing that could be a potential weakness of him is he has a huge problem if they have a lot of CC, because you don't have a lot of survivability in just your baseline stats. Your survivability is your mobility. So if they take that away from you, then that's a real big problem, especially stuff that's very difficult to dodge or that's going to limit your mobility. So like Veigar cages, Poppy circle, or obviously if you get hit by some kind of skill shot like a Lux bind or a Morg bind, that's going to be really, really bad. So that's a problem. But then also if the enemy has a lot of AoE damage, it's hard for you to prevent that without taking damage yourself, because your shield requires you to jump into melee. So if a Ziggs bomb is about to hit your ADC and they're at low health and you're at low health, you can't go in there or you're going to die most of the time, right? Or if you're trying to shield somebody from an Amumu ult or a Malphite ult or something like that, you really can't do that, or you're going to put yourself in a bad situation. So he does have weaknesses, but he has just so much versatility, really good scaling for an engaged champ later on in the game, lots of good itemization choices, and he's just a really safe option as long as you can make good use of that mobility. So that's why I still think he's going to be top tier in my book, as long as you get some practice on him. Okay, Lulu is another one that I think is still going to be really good, and not a lot has changed here. She did get a nerf last patch on her W. I think they gave it 1 extra second, and that did affect her win rate, 1 to 2%. So I don't know if she's as strong as just a sheer blind pick. Like, I don't know if she's someone that you would want with like an Ezreal or a Jhin, or someone who's not going to be getting a lot of attack speed. But I still think she's going to be phenomenal with any champs that benefit heavily from her attack speed and her move speed and the rest of her kit. So really good with like Kog'Maw, Twitch, Jinx, probably pretty good with Kai'Sa. Obviously the knockup is going to be good with Yasuo or Samira off of your ultimate. So she still has a lot of great things going for her. I still think she's the best enchanter out there, but there are some ADCs that would much rather probably just have more all-in pressure and aggression in the early game, like a Tristana, a Draven, Jhin, stuff like that, Lucian. There are other champs that might be better with them. So I think she's a little bit more situational, but she's very, very good at what she does. And the couple of things that set her apart is she has some of the best steroids for attack speed champs, like I just mentioned. Not only does she give out a lot of extra attack speed on her W, but she also attaches picks to people when she shields them, which gives somewhere in the neighborhood around level 9 or 10 of about 80 extra damage per auto attack. So it's not just the attack speed, it's that she really, really amps up how much damage someone does. And that does work with melees too, right? So if you have someone like a Master Yi on your team that's going off, is auto attacking a lot, then that can be a pretty good combo with them. And she does have the versatility of having one of the strongest pieces of point-click CC as well. Now, you can't use both of those. You have to choose either the CC or the attack speed and the move speed steroid. But being able to point-click CC someone for 2.25 seconds is extremely good, obviously, against a lot of these squishier dive champions like a Riven, an Echo, a Diana, things like that. If they jump in and you land that polymorph on them, they're probably going to die, right, in 2.25 seconds. So it's really frustrating for the enemy team. It's excellent against champions that rely heavily on mobility or lifesteal to try to stay alive, because they can't do any of that while they're whimsied. A little bit less good against the turbo tanks, because they just, take a beating for 2 seconds, then wake up and still start killing people. But it is a really good option. And the final thing that's pretty strong about her is her ultimate. It's on a very low cooldown, and it's an infusion of health. So that means that it gets around grievous wounds, and that's huge. So it doesn't scale with plus healing and shielding, which is kind of lame, but you don't have to get a lot of plus healing and shielding. In fact, most builds probably won't get it these days. You're probably going to be getting Shirelia's, almost certainly first item, and then second item, I'd say a lot of times is probably going to be Putrefier for the same reasons I talked about with Rakan. But you could also get Ardent Censer second, and that does have a little bit of plus healing and shielding, but not a ton. So this doesn't matter that this doesn't scale with plus healing and shielding as much as it did in seasons past, where you might be getting something like Ardent Censer into Redemption into Mikhail's or something like that, right? So it's not as much of a problem as it used to be, and it bypasses Grievous Wounds, and that knockup is very relevant and very useful in a lot of situations. Her shield also does not decay, so you get the full value, the full 240 for the entire 2.5 seconds, which is great. And it's on a low cooldown starting at an early level. It's only 8 seconds versus like a Janna shield's like 18 seconds at early levels, and it decays. And if you break the Janna shield, they no longer get the bonus AD. If you break the Pix shield, they still get the on-hit damage for the entire 6 seconds. Or I guess 4 seconds that Pix is attached to them. So it's just really, really nice. Great versatile champion. You do have to be careful with the misclicks. You don't want to accidentally buff an ally when you're meaning to CC an enemy. If you've got like a Zed that's like right on top of your ADC. So that can kind of be a problem. She is also relatively short range. Her E is only, I think, 600 range versus like Janna's shield's like 800 range. So kind of low range, kind of slow. She can move her, like speed up herself with her W, but that means that you don't have it available to do other things. So a little short range, obviously squishy like most enchanters. Not much in the way of like AoE stuff to help out your entire team like a Sona, but she puts a ton of buffs stacked up on that one person that could be a hyper carry on your team. So I still think that she's a very, very strong choice in a lot of situations. Basically, if you have Lulu plus one of those other champs I mentioned that scales really well with her, the Kog'Maw, the Twitch, the Jinx, all of that, if they don't have extremely good dive and they don't shut up that ADC or whatever, it just take over the game by themselves. Like, it's extremely powerful. It forces the enemy to have very specific answers to that. And in YOLO queue, a lot of people are just going to play what they want. And if they don't have an answer to Lulu Cog, you're just going to win almost by default once you get 2 items. Okay, Braum. So Braum is kind of a newer one, and that might raise a couple of eyebrows because in the past, I haven't been a huge fan of Braum. I mean, obviously, he was really good in pro play, but for solo queue, I wasn't a huge fan. And the big reason for that was he's pretty much a peeler tank. So basically like a team fighting tank. And I just thought that enchanters did most of what he was trying to do better, right? They just had better buffs than he did, and we're just going to outscale him really hard. But I think with this season, a lot of that has changed. A lot of the enchanter items have been nerfed significantly, and you don't have that stacking scaling in the same way that you did in the past with the plus healing and shielding, right? Where like your first 3 items might be plus healing and shielding a year ago, you know, with the Redemption, Mikhail's, Ardent Censer. You don't have that as much. So you see most enchanters rushing Shirelia's right now, which is good, but it's not really a scaling item, right? It doesn't have the plus healing and shielding to go with it. And then a lot of times they're going Putrefier as well, which again is good, but it doesn't have that same amount of scaling that's just like runaway, domination in team fights. So I think that the scaling is a little bit closer than it used to be in the past. And I would say that Locket is also very, very powerful right now. So I think that the items have kind of equalized a little bit more. Enchanters are still going to have a bit more of an advantage, but not as much as they used to, I don't think, in terms of itemization for team fights. Also, the meta right now has a lot of auto attackers in it. Like, almost nobody's playing mages. And you're just seeing, like, ranged stuff everywhere. You've got, like, Akshan, and Gnar in the top lane sometimes. It's just all kinds of auto attackers everywhere. And Braum is really good in that environment. Number one, because his passive, whenever you have people auto attacking more often, you're going to trigger his passive. So that's good when you have auto attackers on your team. But it's also good when you have auto attackers on the enemy team. because then your shield is going to be much more effective at blocking all of that out. Lucian also got a pretty substantial buff on this patch. I'm kind of curious, how is his win rate doing? I meant to look at that. I didn't think it would be like massive, but maybe a couple percentage. I think I predicted like 49%, 50%, something like that. Yeah, it's about 49%. So he's more popular than he once was, but he's like the 4th most popular champ. His win rate's not amazing, but he's very, very good with Braum because his double shots trigger his passive. So I just think that just sets up Braum really well right now in the meta. He's very good against a lot of these dive comps as well, just because he can throw up that shield and he can just gum it up with his ultimate, with his auto attacks. I think that he's going to be really solid right now, especially against a lot of the other engaged champs. So that's just why I moved him up here. I've been having some decent success on him lately, and he's feeling pretty strong, especially, like I said, sort of in the absence of enchanters being like super popular right now. He's good, and he can put up a lot of pressure, you know, in the early game. If you're up against something like a Sona or a Nami and they step too close to their minion wave, you know, you can jump to one of your own minions and then just hit them with a Q and just walk them down and take him out. So there's not that much that's new and like exciting about him, I guess. It's just lock it for the most part, and I think you go Thornmail a lot of times as your second item. There are a couple of other options. The fact that other stuff has just been nerfed over time too, like Aftershock's not nearly as good as it used to be back when Braum kind of fell out of the meta. Just the stuff that he couldn't use, like Aftershock, like the plus healing and shielding items, that kind of, you know, bumped him down a little bit compared to his competition, has been weakened, and so therefore he's kind of moved back up a little bit in my mind. So anyways, really solid champ right now. I don't know if I would blind pick him all the time, but I think that if you're trying to play something that can peel pretty well, then I think he's going to be one of the decent options there. Okay, and then Leona's still pretty good. I was debating whether to knock her down a little bit. She did get nerfed on this patch. Her win rate has fallen down to about 50% or so, but I think she still kind of deserves the spot. She still is one of the best early game all-in champions, you know, with a Tristana or a Lucian or something like that. She can go through the minion wave with her E. She has very short cooldowns, so you can really stick to people and just keep CCing them. So that's really good if you want to get the Thornmail, or people have also been getting, I don't remember what it's called, like the green fist thing that increases the CC duration and gives you extra, extra CC duration on the target by lowering their tenacity. It's kind of a decent option on her as well, and then you can go for the classic Zeke's. So she's got a lot of different itemization options. Snowball's really hard. I think they did not touch her ult. I was hoping that they would nerf her ult away from like 90 seconds. But I believe it's still 90 seconds. So it's like the shortest engage ult, or one of the shorter like big ticket engage ults out there. So she's still going to be really good. You know, the difference between her and someone like Braum is that she's just not going to have as many tools to peel later on. But she is very good at, you know, getting in there and diving and being really aggressive. So she's the kind of person you would want against Lulu Cog, versus Braum's not going to be able to do a lot against that. You know, his shield will block some of it, but if they get too fed, it's just going to be lights out. So I think she is still pretty good, even though, like I said, she can sort of have a problem if you fall behind, or if they have really good peeling champs. Like, I think Braum is pretty good into her, because like she just goes in, and then Braum just jumps on whoever she went on, throws up his shield, auto attacks her, and then all of a sudden she's going to get blasted while the enemy can't really trade back through the Braum shield. So she's good, but I think there are increasingly more answers appearing in the meta to her, such as Braum. Rell's coming back. I think Rell's like decent into her. Alistar is like pretty decent into her. But she's still going to be good. And then speaking of which, I have found Alistar to be pretty strong, and usually I just had really never played Alistar consistently, just because it's like, why would I play Alistar when I can just play Rakan? Like, Rakan has Alistar's combo. you know, on one button with his W. Yes, it's not as much damage and it's a smaller radius, but I just didn't really appreciate some of the things that Alistar can do that make him a little bit more unique from other champions. So first of all, he's super tanky off of no items. So in a meta that's increasingly really fast, where it's just, you know, games are decided when people are on 2 items instead of 3 or 4 items a lot of times, then it doesn't matter as much that he doesn't scale very well with stats, because people just aren't going to have the time to get the gold to go get those stats, right? And he's very good early on at pressuring the wave, because, like, you know, with Rakan, they have more notice. Like, it's a lot slower, and there's that little delay when you go up, and that gives them time to flash, that gives them time to sidestep or use their dash or whatever. Alistar's combo is much faster, and it has a much bigger hitbox to it, so... and he's just... it does more damage, too, and he's just scarier in the early game. He's a lot tankier, he has much higher base stats, much higher health, and if you get that combo, then you have your E ticking on somebody. Usually if they don't flash, they're probably going to die. So he has a pretty brutal laning phase if the enemy has a weak lane. He can zone people off really easily. And of course, he's kind of the king of roam, right? Because he doesn't have to get other stats. His combo is not an ultimate. It's just a normal set of abilities, right? It's just W plus Q. So it's basically always available. So you just run around, you know, and just look for WQs. If you can get behind somebody, you can even W and bump them back into the enemy team, which is even more valuable than just a knock-up or a stun, because it's a displacement. So he has a lot of different options, I think, that can be good. He can do an okay job of peeling as well if you use that W to knock people back. So if like Nautilus is just about to hook your ADC, you can headbutt him back, or like Leona, or Zach's trying to fly in and engage on your ADC, you can headbutt him out of the sky. So there are a lot of different interactions with your headbutt that can be pretty handy. And then, of course, your ultimate in a team fight means that you can just, you know, hardcore go in, you know, start a fight, get a pick, drop your ultimate, and just be disruptive in the fight. And you can tower dive extremely well early on in the game. If you just get that wave stacked up and call in the jungler, you know, just go ahead and take it all the way to the bank. They're going to die, right, with that ultimate. So he just accelerates the game really well. He's extremely strong, especially in the early game, with the roams, with the tower diving, with the zoning pressure. He does have sustain, too, which is another thing that's very nice, that he not only sustains himself, but he sustains the ADC. So if you're against, like, double poke, you're against, like, Caitlyn Xerath or something like that in the laning phase, it can be very, very handy to survive until you find those opportunities to go for that all-in. So I think he is good. He is not exactly completely one-dimensional, but he's a little bit, has, you know, fewer options than some of the other champs that we've talked about, particularly someone like Rakan. But what he does very well. In terms of engage, dives, all that stuff. So I think he's really good. There might be some situations where he could be S-class, or if you're, you know, really good with him. But he's still going to be a strong champ. Okay, Zyra is another one that I've tried out, and she, I believe, is situational, but she's very strong in the situations where you would want to pick her. So she's very lane dominant, excellent range, really good to pair with some other kind of poke or lane dominant champion. Like Caitlyn's great with her. Jin's going to be really solid with her. Ashe historically is really good with the poke. Then if Ashe hits the arrow, you hit the full combo on them and they're dead. So Ashe is always a classic pick with Zyra. The main problem with Zyra is she just suffers from the same problems that AP supports have always suffered from, in that their itemization is bad. Right, so they did help a little bit by lowering Leandri's down to 3,200. Honestly, Leandri's is not that much better than Dark Harvester, which has always been 3,200, but it does help you out a little bit, especially if you combine it with Demonic Embrace. But still, those items are very expensive. You're talking 3,200 for Leandri's, and I think Demonic is 3,000, versus, you know, tanks are going to be just getting Locket, and then maybe Zeke's or something for 2,400, or Thornmail for 2,700. And then Enchanters, it's going to be the same drill. It's going to be Shirelia's for 2,500, Putrifier 2,300. So they're just going to be really, really far ahead of you in terms of items, because 700 or 800 gold is a very, very big deal for support. I mean, that's like, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes of just like standard support play where you're not getting a million kills. So she's good. She's lane dominant. She can definitely blow people up out of bushes. She has excellent team fight damage, really good zoning pressure, very good at peeling if the enemy wants to come into you and you're looking to blow them up. But her E is a pretty slow skill shot if they see it coming, right? If you're not coming out of a bush and they are, you know, paying attention to you, it's pretty easy to dodge that. That's your only really reliable piece of CC. You do have your R, but most people will be able to flash or dash out of it if they're not rooted by your E. She can't poke under tower super well, like you kind of can, but the tower is going to one-shot your plants. And the plants are on a pretty long cooldown early on, so she doesn't poke under tower as well as something like a Lux or Xerath or anything like that. But she does have really good vision control because of the plants, so you don't have to face check as much. You don't have to use your wards and walk them forward to get deeper vision. You can use the plants to walk forward, and then you'll just be able to put more wards in more optimal spots more often with Zyra than you would with other champs who might have to walk those wards forward. So overall, she's good. And then she's also just squishy and immobile, right? So if it gets to the mid to the late game and they have, you know, any of the 80% of the champions in League that have a ton of mobility and a ton of damage right now, and they catch you out in the river or just anywhere else, then you're probably dead. So in solo queue, you can count on, you know, most of the time having one sort of diver or assassin, and then a lot of times you'll have 2 or maybe 3. Like I said, in team fights, she kind of has tools to deal with that in some circumstances with your E. But if they just catch you out and it's just 1v1 and all they have to do is dodge your E, most people can do that, and you're going to die if that happens. So she's okay. She just needs a lot of gold, and she needs to be ahead, you know, pressing towers or pressing objectives, and she does not want to be rotating from lane to lane when there's all these divers potentially waiting for her. Okay. Nautilus, still going to be pretty good. I think he's... I don't know. It's hard to say. He's still strong. I would probably still put the other 3 tanks I mentioned, the Braum, Leona, and Alistar, a little bit higher, but the thing about Nautilus is he has the weakest defensive steroid probably of all 3 of those. When you think about a Braum shield, Leona's W, Alistar's ultimate, he's going to be pretty squishy unless you get a lot of items. Now, he does have pretty high baseline armor. I think it's like 36, and his health is pretty good. It might be 37. His health is pretty good early on versus Braum, Alistar, and Leona all have 44 starting armor, I'm pretty sure. So he's a little bit lighter on that front. His W has a pretty long cooldown, and it's a kind of a dinky shield, and usually you don't max that. Versus you are maxing Leona's shield, and then Alistar is just, you have your ult and press R. So there's that, and he can't hook over walls, so that kind of limits the types of plays you can make. However, the hook is very fast, and it has a huge hitbox. So, like, open field, if you're staring people down or you're throwing out of a bush at somebody or something, there's a pretty high probability that you're going to hit it. So that's nice. And he does have really good wave clear with his E, but it does cost a lot of mana, so you do have to be careful. So his AoE damage is pretty good in team fights. Probably has the best wave clear of anyone there if you max your E. Really good open field hook. Surpassed only by Blitz, probably, in terms of sort of the speed and the hitbox and just how easy it is to hit. And then his ultimate's really strong, too. It's pretty good range on it. I think it's like 800 range. It's long enough to, press on ADCs in team fights. And they just can't dodge it, right? It's just a point click. The only thing they can do is if they have Hourglass or they have some kind of bubble or something that prevents it from hitting them. But otherwise, it's going to not only hit them, but knock up everyone else in the process. So, super, super useful in team fights. So that's why a lot of pro teams will take him. It's just because that R just, like, completely dominates team fights most of the time. Okay, so he's pretty good. Squishier tank, high probability of hitting your Q open field at the cost of less versatility. And and really high impact ultimate. Okay, then we have Rell. I haven't personally played Rell a ton. I played her a little bit when she very first came out. But she has some really nice combos, right? If you can go in, with your horse, knock somebody over, and then stun them with the E, and then put your R up so they're going to have a harder time getting away. She can be pretty strong. Another thing that's very nice about her, and that so many champions are taking Sterix right now, is that her Q will knock off the Sterix. It also knocks off Locket. Just any shield that they have, a Lulu shield, anything, it just deletes it. So that's very, very nice, particularly against those huge shields. Locket, hard counter to set with his ultimate. Tom Kench with his shield. So there are a lot of really, really good matchups for her to knock that shield off. So that is very nice as well. So she's all right. She is good at champs that are trying to dive you that rely on mobility. I'll tell you that I hate to play against her as Rakan because when she presses her E, it's like a circle around the person that's a stun. Like you've got the little line between them that she creates, but it's also like a direct radius of like 100 around each person. You and the person that you have your tether with. So anytime I try to go in as Rakan and W somebody, because I need to be on top of them to knock them up, and there's that little half a second delay, she can just press E and basically stun me, and my W never goes off. So like a decent Rell, just like pretty hard counters Rakan. It's very, very annoying to deal with her. So anyways, I think that she's pretty good, although I don't have a lot of personal experience on her. Her win rate has gone up a little bit, so I'll have to try out a bit more. Last few here, and we'll see if we can keep this under 40. Nami just got some pretty nice buffs. She got a little bit more health, like 15 health, which isn't a huge deal. But then her W, I believe, got its mana cost lowered pretty significantly at later ranks. And so her win rate's gone up a bit. And it's possible that she's just been pretty good the whole time, and people just haven't played her. I mean, she does have very nice ranges. Her bubble's like 900, her E is like 800. But then when you put it on somebody, it's whatever the range of their auto attacks are. So if you put it on a Lucian who just dashed forward 500 units ahead of you, it's not just the 500 range that you're getting with the E, but it's also his auto attack range, right, of another 500. So, and the same thing with your wave, right? Your wave is technically, I think, 700 range, but then it can bounce even further to that, to do damage to people. So it's pretty nice ranges on all of her abilities. Obviously, if you hit that bubble, it's really good. The 1.5 second stun that's also a knockup for Yasuo and Samira is very good, and more people are playing Lucian. Lucian's extremely good with Nami because his double shot, each one of those shots triggers her E. So I think that she's pretty strong. One of the problems potentially is that so many people have so much mobility that they can dodge the bubble easier, because the bubble's not a skill shot. It's not like a Lux bind, right, where Lux bind covers that entire line. If anyone is on that line, then they're going to get hit by it, right? Versus the Nami bubble, it has to land directly on that spot, so they have more dodging angles. They can basically step into the bubble, they can step forward through it, versus you can't do that with Lux. It takes away that angle because it'll still hit you if you step forward through a Lux bind, Morg bind, a lot of skill shots. But Nami, they can dodge any direction around the bubble. And that definitely comes up, especially, some places where you could walk them into a tight choke where they don't have a lot of angles, like, on a ramp or between the tower and the wall or something. It'll almost guarantee a Lux bind to hit or a Morg bind to hit, but then they have that extra angle to step through versus the Nami. So it definitely does come up. So the skill shot's a bit harder to land. Your ultimate is very slow, especially at long ranges. Unless the enemy is CC, they're probably going to be able to sidestep it. But it does make it very hard to dive through that tidal wave as well, especially in chokes. Because it checks, the vertical angle as well. So you can't, like, jump over it or something. I mean, you can't do that with, I don't think, hardly any skill shots. But she's decent. But she still, as with other enchanters, she's going to be squishy. People can engage on her. And her scaling is a little bit weaker because she only has one heal in her kit, right? Her W, and it's on a pretty long cooldown. However, like I mentioned earlier with Lulu, who also has one, heal, right? Her shield that scales with plus healing and shielding. Like I mentioned with her, a lot of people just aren't getting the plus healing and shielding items anymore, right? A lot of them are just going like Shirelia's into Putrefier. So that's not as much of a weakness as maybe it has been in seasons past. Okay. Sona is really good right now. After that rework, she's almost got a 54% win rate, so I'll have to try her out. But she does scale extremely well with plus healing and shielding. I think you still go Shirelia's on her. And you might still go Putrefier too. Looks like Staff of Flowing Water is pretty good. It looks like maybe people are going back to Moonstone. They're both really good options on her. It looks like, yeah, Shirelia's does have the higher win rate. But Staff of Flowing Water has an even higher win rate than Putrefier does. That's insane. Second item, 67% win rate. Holy crap. I'm going to have to try her out a bit more. But basically, it's still the same old Sona. She's just got better scaling at like that 25-minute mark. Once you can complete your stacks, she's going to be super strong. But you have really easy poke. In the early game, you just walk up, use your Qs. If you can auto-attack, great. If not, you can still get stacks and still stack your Frostfang. So that's nice. And then it's just the same. You just get a bunch of teamfight items, position in the back, and don't die. Just spam your abilities, hand out buffs, be ready with your ultimate if they try to, come at you. And that's about it. She's one of the easiest supports to play, I think. And so that gives her a lot of reliability. And then, obviously you can optimize a little bit by trying to get your green shot and then putting that on a high damage dealer. So, if Echo's trying to dive your ADC or something, having that green shot ready is like a little mini exhaust to lower their damage by, I think, 25%. Can definitely be clutch in a lot of situations. So, I think she's pretty good. Now, I haven't tried this rune setup with the Presence of Mind, but that's actually pretty clever, because one of the big problems early on is she can run into mana issues, especially if you don't open up with, or you don't get a tier early, which a lot of people aren't doing those builds anymore. So it's pretty nice to get the Presence of Mind to help out with that. I guess you could get cut down as well, which adds a little bit of damage. I usually like to get free boots with enchanters just so I can accelerate into that second item faster, and also because you're very rarely going to be roaming by yourself on enchanters. Usually you just kind of hang out in the lane. It's because it's so dangerous if you get caught in the river. So I usually like boots cosmic, but maybe this is better. Or maybe you could compromise and just go boots biscuits if you want extra mana. I'm not really sure. But yeah, she's doing very well. Playstyle, same basically that it's been since Season 1. Or very close to it. Just survive, press your buttons, pass out auras. Good to go. Okay, Yumi's still okay. They did buff Moonstone recently. I think she probably is still going Shirelia's, or that's going to be the better option on her. They haven't changed a ton about Yumi. She's still extremely good if you can attach her to one of these bruiser type of champions that can run around and, dominate the map. So she's okay, but nothing much has changed. It looks like Moonstone is very similar to Shirelia's, so just Moonstone, Staff of Flowing Water should be good to go. And then Bard, I haven't played Bard a ton, and I haven't seen a ton of Bards. As usual, he's just weird. He has almost no scaling from items. He gets all of his scaling from meeps. So he just kind of cobbles together whatever's going to give him speed and some survivability. So a lot of times these days that's going to be like Shirelia's plus Dead Man's Plate, just to run around and get more chimes and, gank lanes and all of that Bard stuff. Now, I think they did nerf his ult a while ago to have a slightly longer cooldown, but he still should be pretty strong. But yeah, he's okay. If you're really good on him, you can make him work. I think there are probably better options for most people, but he does have a pretty good win rate right now. So I think he's definitely playable. And then a couple of notable ones that I've kind of nudged down a little bit here. Thresh, I kind of moved down just because they did directly nerf him a few patches ago. And I just feel like he has bad matchups into a lot of tanks. Like, if he tries to go in, he's a lot squishier than many of them are. He doesn't have as much longer duration hard CC, especially AoE hard CC. When you think about, Braum being able to potentially stun an entire team over time, whenever you're landing those procs on people, or you think about Alistar getting, a 2 or 3 person knock-up. Same thing with Nautilus or Leona. Thresh basically just has his hook, and his flay is a good displacement if they're trying to move, but it's not a very long piece of CC, right? It only, knocks them up for like a quarter of a second or something like that. And then they're slowed, but that doesn't really stop them from attacking or using abilities or mobility or whatever. And it's the same thing with his ultimate. Like, it does pretty good damage, and it's a slow, but slows aren't nearly as effective as they used to be, I think, in the game, just because so many people have dashes that aren't really affected by slows significantly. So, he's okay if you're, a god and you land those hooks or you get those awesome flash flays early with Tristana, he's great. But I think you do have to snowball pretty hard early because his team fight, can be very problematic, especially into, like the Braums, the Leonas, stuff like that later on. So he's still good if you're good on him. It's just, it's a super high skill cap, and I think sort of the matchups are shifting against him. Maokai is still, okay. He did get directly nerfed on this patch to where he does less AP damage. I think he may have gotten some higher base stats, or, his Q did a bit more damage or something. I don't remember. But the main issue here is I think the AP build with, the Mandate and the Demonic Embrace is still going to be his optimal build, even though that did get nerfed. But there's just so much anti-healing and shielding. Or, there's so much healing and shielding in the meta right now that people can just heal through. It's like, okay, they eat a couple of your seeds, and then they just, kill the Gromp, and they're healed to full, right, off of lifesteal. Or they just go up to a minion wave and just clear the wave, and they're healed up. So, I think there's just a lot of healing in the game. And the fact that if you're going AP Maokai, you don't have great access to Grievous Wounds. Yes, you can do Putrefire, but it's a little weird because his AP ratios are pretty bad. It's mostly just that proc damage off of Demonic once you complete it that's good. So, he's okay. He doesn't have very much pressure in the lane at all, right? You just kind of throw seeds in bushes and, occasionally you poke him and that's it. If jungler comes, you can flash W. So, he's alright, but I feel like, the nerfs are finally adding up, and just all of the healing just makes it difficult for those seeds to have the same impact they used to have. Lux is still pretty decent, probably underappreciated. A lot of people play her, or I feel like I see her fairly often. Maybe I just saw a bunch of Luxes one day. But she is pretty good with a lot of poke champs. She's one of my favorite high pressure, long range champs. I like her over something like Vel'Koz or Xerath in the lane. It's because, that bind is so nice. 2 seconds off of just 1 point on your Q is huge. The E is almost impossible to dodge for a lot of people. And the interaction between the E and Cheap Shot is actually really nice. Because you throw your E out there, it slows them, then you reactivate it, and then you get that Cheap Shot proc. So if you combine, Scorch plus Comet plus Cheap Shot, that's quite a bit of harassment in the early game. Now, she doesn't have a ton in terms of utility in CC. She does have her Q. If they dodge it, that's a problem, but still 2 seconds for 1 point is nice. Obviously, the ultimate is a lot of damage and is very good. So, and you can check bushes with the E, which is huge, kind of like what I was talking about with Zyra, so you don't have to face check bushes as much as you might with some other champions. So I wouldn't play her all the time, but maybe with a Jhin or a Caitlyn, if you really like playing Lux, then I think that can be good, especially if you believe you're going to be on the strong side of the map. So if your jungler is going to be bottom a lot to try to make plays, which is good because you'll have priority, so you can go get dragons or they can gank through the lane. That's nice. But if you have an AFK farm jungler or something like that, and they have something with a lot of pressure in the early game, they have a Xin Zhao or a Rammus or something like that, it could be really tough for you because you don't have a lot of great escapes. So, she's okay. The last few, and then we'll go ahead and end it here. Janna, I think she's okay. She just has super long cooldowns on her shield, and you lose the AD when it breaks. It's decaying. It just feels like she's been nerfed a little bit too much for my taste, but her win rate's still okay. So she's a decent peeler champ, but honestly, if I wanted to play something that peeled, I'd probably rather just play something like Braum right now. Or even something like Lulu, who historically doesn't peel as well as Janna. just the fact that you get all that offense to go with the Lulu is pretty nice. Seraphine's okay. She offers some decent poke in the early game. She has a long cooldown, AoE shield. Obviously, that ultimate is extremely good if you can hit that on multiple people, but otherwise, she's not like super inspiring in my mind, but she's okay. Blitzcrank has a really high win rate, and I mean, maybe he deserves to be tier 2. He's pretty one-dimensional in my mind. It's like you hit the hook and you're a god, you know, you're going to win the fight, or you just don't hit the hook and you're worthless. So maybe that's not a fair assessment. I mean, he does have a knock-up with his E on a sort of short cooldown, which is okay. So he's okay. Obviously going to be much better against the squishy champions out there than the tanks. But if you can land a lot of hooks, he could potentially be a really strong champ. Brand is okay. I'd just rather play Zyra. The main difference is Brand has more uptime on his spells. Zyra, you're waiting on seeds. Brand's W is on a much shorter cooldown. So you have more, chances to try to fish for those skill shots. And then, in team fights, just your ultimate being able to bounce around and hit a bunch of people, especially lower elos where people might be clumped up and explode on top of each other, then Brand can be really good. He does not have the free scouting of Zyra, and he is shorter range when you consider that, placing the plant, I think, is 800 range, and then the plant can attack for like 650 or 750. You're looking at around like 1500 range, effectively, for Zyra plants to land some poke, right? Versus I think Brand is like 900 on his W. And then I guess that's pretty much it in terms of champions I want to talk and mention. I have played Malphite a couple of times. It was okay. One game seemed really dominant. Other games seemed pretty worthless, but it was pretty fun. So thanks for the donations out there for the Malphite games. If you can get a lot of value out of your ult, he definitely can be strong. I do have Karma a little bit lower than I guess a lot of people would like. They did rework her recently, but she has good pressure early if you super take advantage of that. But her scaling late game is it's pretty bad after they nerfed her ult many years ago. So she's okay, but if you want to go for the heavy poke in the early game, and pair it with something like a Caitlyn or a Jhin or whatever, I'd probably rather have Lux or Zyra or any number of those types of champs. And that's pretty much going to be it. So we'll try to keep under 50 minutes, but thanks very much for tuning in. As always, I appreciate it, and we'll see everybody next time.